inaugural 2024 Oysterville History Forum. And thank you to Sydney Stevens, who has so faithfully organized this gathering for us, a monthly gathering, a chance for us to get together and share information, hear stories, tell stories about the Long Beach Peninsula, Oysterville, Pacific County, Southwest Washington, and the Lower Columbia region. So,
and you are?
And I am Dale Olson.
Sorry.
And I don't live here. I often wish I did. But Sydney is kind enough to include us in kind of the early stages of the planning of this this forum, and somehow we haven't managed to, escape her grasp. So, so here we are. Now, is Tucker here?
No. Tucker has a bad cold, and he did not want to expose us.
Okay, well, thank you to Tucker Walksmith and the Oysterville Community Club for allowing us to meet here in the old schoolhouse. And your donations, if you're kind enough to leave one at the table there in the can, those donations do help with the maintenance and heating and upkeep of this wonderful old building. So thank you for anyone who has contributed. And also there's a sign-up sheet back there so you can make sure to record that you're here today and to be included on Sydney's email notifications about these meetings. So today we're sharing stories and information about shipwrecks and rescues, and even lighthouses, because those come into play as well. And so to kick it off this morning, we're going to start with Sydney Stevens, who has a story or two up her sleeve. I'm sure that comes as no surprise to anyone. And then we'll just go from there. And as each person's presentation kind of winds down, there's then an opportunity for you all to ask questions or to contribute more information to what's been shared, or to tell a story that that you think relates to that, or that we'd enjoy hearing. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sydney.
Okay, and then I'll introduce the next person. And
perfect.
Okay.
So, Sydney, I wanted to again commend you, the organizers, for arranging the chairs in the shape of an oyster.
We did that all so that you would notice.
Where's the pearl?
Well, and it was all, I think, Tucker and Carol's doing. Yeah, because they organized the physical part of it. I do want to say one thing about, we ask every time about people that would like to get notifications and so on to sign on the sign-up sheet, put your email. And of course, I'm the one that sends it out, and I'm also the one that lost all my email addresses recently. And I'm rebuilding it. So if you got an email relative to this forum in the last couple of days, you're good. You're golden. If you didn't, would you please leave me your email address? It's the worst thing that could happen. Okay. I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about a couple of personal things to do with wrecks and rescues, and tell you a little bit of general information first. Since 1792, approximately 2,000 large ships have sunk in and around the Columbia River Bar with a loss of 700 lives. 2,000 large ships. That does not count the fishing vessels, the butterfly fleet, or all the other smaller boats. And beginning about the time of the California Gold Rush in 1848-49, the area was beginning already to be called graveyard of the Pacific. And I thought that was kind of an interesting fact. When the 1854 territorial legislature met, one of the things that they did was create the elective office of Wreck Master for all the counties of Washington that bordered on the Pacific Ocean. It was the Wreck Master's duty to assume charge of any marine wreck after it had been abandoned, and to save all of it that was possible for the benefit of the owners. The Wreck Master was also charged with protecting wrecks and their cargoes from the seagulls, a local term that referred to people who helped themselves to the treasures that littered the beach after a wreck. He was also responsible for making a list of the many ships destroyed each year on the treacherous Columbia River Bar, and I'm assuming that that's the Wreck Master of Pacific County that was responsible for making a list of those wrecks destroyed up at the bar, and to see to the burial of lost crew members. The Wreck Master was allowed a salvage of 10% and was required to post a bond of $2,000. After 1914, the office no longer appeared on the ballot. Presumably, more modern aids to navigation and better local law enforcement made the job unnecessary. So there you have it. My own interest in shipwrecks is, like everybody else's, curiosity and horror and all of that. But I'm also very much interested in how some of those wrecks, not all, I don't think, but some of them very much affected the lives of the people on the peninsula, and have affected the history of the peninsula, and have affected us. And I wanted to tell you a couple of those, and they won't be news to you, I don't think, but perhaps thinking of them in terms of how they've affected our history might be a different way to look at them a little bit. One of them was the Strathplane, and I think, Michael, are you going to talk about that a little bit too?
Yeah.
It came in at the Ilwaco Beach, which is now called Clipson Beach, in 1891. And Ilwaco Beach was one of the very first life-saving stations here. And that's what they called the beach at that time, Ilwaco Beach. It wasn't until one of the wives of the head of the Ilwaco Beach station wanted to create a post office so that the crews who were there could get mail from their family and send mail. And so she created a post office, and her husband, the captain there, named it Clipson Post Office after the Chinook name for sunset, Clipson. And so it then eventually, of course, Ilwaco Beach became Clipson Beach. So the Strathplane came in, and that was the wreck that maybe Michael will tell you a little bit more about, that had the famous stallions that helped in the rescue, and Michael and I had quite a discussion about that last night. Yeah, you can make faces, but... okay, and so those rescue horses were trained apparently by Dr. T.W. Parks, and Michael will tell you later a little bit about that. But to me, the one thing that was of most importance in that wreck was the rescue of Jack Payne, who was a 16-year-old cabin boy, and when he landed on the beach, he suddenly became 19 years old, and decided that he was never going to go to sea again, which he did not. And he, by the time he was, in fact, 19, he had joined forces with George Hibbert, who had just started the Chinook Observer in Ilwaco. And Jack Payne actually owned the Observer when Hibbert got tired of the job, and then Hibbert came back, and, you know, it was one of those. But we still enjoy the Chinook Observer today, and if it had not been for Jack Payne, perhaps we wouldn't have Chinook Observer. So I think that's kind of one of those interesting things. I also want to mention the Alice, a French ship that came in opposite Ocean Park on January 15th, 1909. At that time, my Oysterville grandmother was in Portland, and she had just had her fifth child, my Uncle Edwin. And her oldest daughter, Medora, was in Oysterville, and her father was in charge of the 4 children. And Mrs. Matthews, you know the whalebone house, Mrs. Matthews came to stay and to help Medora, who was 9, and Papa, who was a dairy farmer and was busy, to help them out during my grandmother's lying in. So 10-year-old Medora was here, and she wrote this letter. She dated it Friday, January 15th, 1909, at 8:30. Dearest Mama, there was a ship come in last night at 3 o'clock. The crew consists of 26 men. They can't speak English. Bradford, Dorothy, and I went to see the ship. The ship is about a mile from Ocean Park. There was quite a number going from town. I bet they beat the wreckmaster there. I don't know where the wreckmaster was living, but probably not in Oysterville or Ocean Park. The ship is about a mile from Ocean Park. Oh, okay. We didn't have any school after 12 o'clock because we wanted to go see the ship. Your loving daughter, Medora Espy. So I guess when the ships came in, school was out. Some of you might remember Beulah Wickberg, and Beulah Slinger in Wickberg. She grew up in Oysterville, but by the time of the wreck of the Alice, she was a young mother, about 22, I think, in 1909, and living in Ocean Park. And Beulah loved music. She wrote music, and she wrote songs, and she loved to play the piano. And so she lived to be 102. And she told her whole life about when the crew of the Alice came in, she would go and play the piano. She said, I couldn't speak any French, none of us could, and they couldn't speak English, but everyone understands the language of music. I love that. So more than 100 years after all of that, in the summer of 2018, just before COVID, a young woman came to the peninsula with a friend. Her name is Isabelle Lecoq. My French is horrible. And Isabelle was an exchange teacher from Nantes in France to, I want to say Tacoma, but that might not be right. But whichever town it was up in the Tacoma area, it and Nantes are sister cities. And so these two teachers would exchange every couple of years. And so Isabel had been in the area before, but she decided that she would like to come this time on a visit to the peninsula because her grand-père, her grandfather, had been on the Alice and had come in here. And so she spent 2 days on the peninsula, and she talked to everybody and went every place and learned a lot. And right at the end of it, I got a call from Matt Witters who said, would you interview her? And I said, yes, I'd love to, but she had already left. And so I did get a hold of her teaching exchange teacher's number, and Isabel was still in the area, and so she called me. And I was able to interview her and do a story for the paper, and that was great. And she and I are still in touch, as a matter of fact. And she planned to come back the following summer, COVID. So she has not been back. I don't know if she still will come back or not. But what I thought was really interesting in all of this, her story was different from the story that her grandpère told was a bit different than the story that we always heard. What I had always understood, and I think most people did, was that the crew en masse, and it wasn't that big a crew, stayed at the Taylor Hotel, or the Taylor Hotel found places for them to stay. There was an annex to the hotel at that time, so that was possible. But she said her story was, we were told by grandpère that he swam to shore and was rescued by a woman riding a horse. He stayed with that family of loggers for 2 years. The young woman was in love with him and wanted to marry him. Apparently, he didn't feel quite the same way, for he finally left for Portland. And Isabel said, we don't know when, but we do know he left on a ship that took him back to France. Many years later, I don't know how many, he met and married my grand-mère, and they had 2 children. One is my mother, who is now 82. This was in 2018. Pépère was from Nantes, France, and that is where I was born and grew up, and where she still lives. And so, what she was coming to try and find out was, who was the logger family around there was living with, and nobody here knew that story, and so I don't know if it would be possible to pursue it or not. I kind of think she needs to head for the Nacelle area. I don't know if it would, or maybe we could find out what kind of logging they were doing in this area at that time. But anyway,
write a story in your column and maybe somebody will see it. That was my grandmother.
It's a great story. And just for interest's sake, for you that want to see the picture of the crew. Oh, and I did send her, as you go to cyberspace, a picture of the crew in front of the Taylor Hotel, which she had seen at Adelaide's. She went, Adelaide's was open. And she wanted a picture, and I sent it to her, and she showed it to grandmère, who recognized her, she hadn't even met him at that point, but she recognized him. He is in the picture. So, and so what was he doing during that tour?
Having fun, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so is Michael following me?
Yeah, Michael.
Michael, it's all yours.
Okay, so I got my arm twisted, and it's hard to say no to her, so here I am. You're all victims at this point. But anyway, I'm going to talk about 3 lighthouses down here.
Michael,
Yes?
do you want to move out here so that you're in the camera?
No?
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, I'm Michael Ameshko, and I'm just one of those interested persons, like all of you, in the history of Pacific County.
Michael, would you not turn your back to us?
Can I go home now? Sorry.
No, you're have a seat.
Okay, so I've just been really interested in Pacific County history since I got run down here and got to play in some of the wrecks that were still visible on the beach when I was a little kid, like the Solano and the Arrow and the Intrepid, and really is what a great thing to fire a kid's imagination. So Sydney asked me to talk about the 3 lighthouses down here, and I you know, I told her, I said, well, yeah, I will, but only if it's not a boring talk. Because, you know, lighthouses are lighthouses, once they get built, there they stand. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the lighthouses, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about some wrecks that are associated with those lighthouses. So the first lighthouse is the Cape Disappointment Lighthouse. It's created by an executive order in February 26, 1852, and which created the Cape Disappointment Military District. And the first appropriation, $52,000 or $53,000, wasn't for barracks or the officers' quarters or anything like that. It was for the lighthouse, because that was really what was most important. And unfortunately, there were several unexpected impediments that delayed construction. And the first of those was the wreck of the bark Oriole. So I managed to find a newspaper report in the Portland Times dated September 24th, 1853. The wreck was a few days before that. And I thought it was really instructive of what actually happened and some of the kind of weird things that surrounded that. So the Oriole was the ship that was sailed from the East Coast to bring all the construction supplies, including the granite, to build the first lighthouse there at KP. Same lighthouse it turned out. So I'm going to read this to you because it really explains what happened. And and I like it because it was done right after the wreck. So here's what it says. The bark Oriole, Captain Lentz, having on board the materials for the lighthouse on Cape Disappointment, together with the hands, and it says here some 20, other reports say there were 30 on there, necessary for its erection. It was wrecked on the Columbia River bar on Monday afternoon last, the 19th, under the following circumstances. So she arrived after a couple of months at the mouth of the Columbia, and she waited 8 days outside for a pilot. She took on a pilot Sunday evening, and it happened to be George Flavel, who was a very famous Columbia River bar pilot. That was Sunday evening, and was being taken in by the new or middle channel. Now, most of the ships came in on the north channel back then, but Captain Flavel decided on the middle or new channel. So after entering a short distance, the tide changing and the wind lulling forced the ship onto the shoal water among the breakers, which were running high and struck, and in 5 minutes was found to be filling fast, and this is what I found important, and the ebb tide carrying her into deep water. So they're out there for 8 days after a couple of months voyage, tacking back and forth, the flags flying for a pilot, please. And finally, George Flavel comes and decides to take them in on an ebb tide, which is the water is flowing out to sea, and in a sail ship that if the wind dies, guess what's going to happen? Well, that's what happened. So it forced, without the wind, it forced the ship onto the classic spit. So it took 5 minutes, and the ship was found to be filling fast, and the ebb tide carried her back into deep water. And this says assisted by the sails. They haven't been set to bring her into the channel again immediately after she first struck. The order was then given to man the boats, which was done with safety, dispatch, and coolness. The boats were 2 in number, and nearly all got in excepting a few who remained and cut the lighter loose, which floated as the ship sunk, and was taken in tow by the lifeboat on the yawl. It was thought advisable to retain the lighter for the following reasons: so as not to overload the other boats and to have it to use when landing, it being safer and capable of safely carrying a very heavy burden. But after 12 hours hard rowing in the night, it was found that the tide was taking them all out to sea. So imagine that, 12 hours in a rowboat out in the mouth of the Columbia at night. And there another account says it was freezing. It was very cold. All hands left the lighter and went into the boats, and the lighter was cut adrift. In the morning, the pilot boat, which had been in search of the wreck, was discovered outside the bar, and the boats made for her, and the crews taken on board and brought to Astoria, and no lives were lost. So Captain Flavel, the bar pilot, this is the newspaper talking now, was cool and vigilant when dangers thickened. And as soon as he found the vessel wrecked, set about saving the lives of those on board. So this is the pilot who's supposed to get him safely out over the bar. The bark Oriole had been used for about 8 months and had been used for transporting materials for the 4 lighthouses which had been constructed down the coast. So it brought out materials for a couple of California lighthouses too. She had at this time a very full freight of very heavy and solid materials consisting of hewn stone, paints, oil, used in constructing of lighthouses. And the paper says we are indebted to Mr. F.X. Kelly, one of the contractors, for putting up these lighthouses for the above information. And he assures us that this accident will not delay the construction of this lighthouse further than after the rainy weather. Well, that wasn't quite true. It took a little longer. But what kills me about this is there's a little appendix to this article, and it says, and it's a letter to the editor, and it says, "Dear Sir, we the undersigned, on behalf of the crew and passengers of the bark Oriole of Baltimore, beg to return thanks to the pilots of the Columbia Bar for their kindness in their endeavors to save us after the wreck and supplying us with clothes. And we also wish to testify to the skill, seamanship, and coolness of Captain George Flavel, the pilot, in the moment of danger, and that he, from the knowledge of the bar and coast, was instrumental on being landed, on our being landed safe." So that kind of, you know, Flavel must have really stepped up and helped these folks in these boats get back to the schooner. But man, can you imagine that? It's an ebb tide, and he decides to take the ship in, and what could go wrong did go wrong, and you know, the ship sank. And of course, it did delay the construction of the lighthouse by a few years.
Michael, just because I don't understand the components, what's a lighter and why was it important to cut them?
Well, a lighter was a kind of a flat bottom barge-like boat that was on the Oriole to transfer supplies like the stone when they actually anchored at a place where there was no dock, no beach. Well, there might have been a beach. And then it was easier to get the materials off the boat to the shore. So it was apparently latched on the deck, and I don't know, it doesn't really say whether they added the materials to it or the materials were already in there, but they decided to take it with them. Except, you know, they were rowing for 8 or 12 hours and getting tired trying to pull all this and save these materials, because, I mean, they knew that without these materials, you know, it's going to be a long time before that lighthouse got constructed.
Did any of the materials get retrieved?
No, they lost them all.
Was that the materials for the North Head Lighthouse?
No, the North Head was considerably later, so this
Right,
was,
but I know they lost the materials for that one also, I believe. Or maybe it was the way
maybe.
backwards.
I know that they had to change the lens out on the Cape Disappointment Lighthouse, because the one that came back again was too big for the lighthouse, and they had to reconstruct the Cape Disappointment Lighthouse for the bigger lens. Then when they built the North Head Lighthouse, they used that lens for the North Head Lighthouse, and they put a different lens at Cape D. But that's way over my pay grade for talking about that particular part of the lighthouse thing. So, the lighthouse at Cape D, oh, well, there was a couple other things too. I talked about the Fresnel lens, it was too large, and then they brought a fog bell out, weighed 1,600 pounds, and they installed it up there at the lighthouse. But unfortunately, a lot of times the waves crashing at the base there were so loud you couldn't hear the fog bell. So they had to take the fog bell out, and they sent it up to Puget Sound for a lighthouse there where there's just little ripples, you know, you can hear the fog bell. So, you know, they made a few mistakes, but they did get the lighthouse built. So it was finally lit on October 15th, 1856. Most sources agree that it was the first operational lighthouse in the Pacific Northwest. There's some other sources that might indicate that the Shoalwater Bay light was first, but from what I have been able to find out, it's the Cape D has the honor of being the first lighthouse in the Pacific Northwest that was actually lit. Okay, so the next one's the North Head Lighthouse, and it was constructed in 1897 after complaints that the Cape D Lighthouse was obscured to ships approaching from the north by the headland. And the headland extended from the light, which resulted in tremendous losses of life and property. Of course, even when they got all the lighthouses built, there were still a lot of wrecks, but they did help. But anyway, so the North Head Light was built just 2 miles away from Cape D. It had a beam of 3.5 million candle power and bright enough to be seen up to 20 miles out to sea. And it was clearly visible to ships traveling from the north. So a related shipwreck to this is the Strathline, which is one of my favorite shipwrecks down here on the coast. It was pretty dramatic. It was a big ship. It was 1,360 tons, 235 feet long, and it wrecked on November 3rd, 1891. It's important to the lighthouses because they were losing ships because of that. They couldn't see the light, or at least that was the claim. And this one kind of gave the final impetus to getting that lighthouse built. So it's an interesting wreck. She was 19 days from Honolulu when she struck the beach on the ebb tide, again, at 5 a.m., and had completely disintegrated by 3 p.m. the following afternoon. Think about that, you know? Wooden ships, they didn't last very long in the surf, and it completely disintegrated. You know, it just blows your mind. You think of the power of the waves back then, and even now. The Captain Cutho recorded 12 hours earlier in his log that, quote, thick fog, barometer falling fast, course northeast by east. He had figured his position to be 60 miles offshore at the time the vessel struck the beach. The weather had been so thick that it had been impossible to take observations. So it was no other than L.A. Loomis, my favorite railroad man, and his family that noticed a ship ashore a short distance from their home overlooking the Pacific. And his mansion was at 178th and Pacific, the Pacific Highway. In fact, if you go up there, you can still see kind of the outline of the built-up sand where it was at. But right now there's just a bunch of little cabins on it. It's amazing. But anyway, the wind was blowing a gale, and as the vessel rose and fell into breakers, there were spars, blocks, and bits of rigging were seen to give way. Loomis dispatched urgent messages to Oahu and to the Fort Canby life-saving stations. The telegraph lines were down, so another message had to be delivered on horseback. Now, according to Wayne O'Neill in the book Man of the Sea, and that is a really good book, I recommend it highly, the life-saving crew was dispatched from Fort Canby and sent to the scene via the IR&N Railway and did not arrive till 9:30, so the ship ran aground at 5. So it was like 4.5 hours before they could get there. In the Gibbs book on shipwrecks, Pacific Graveyard, he states that the Oahu Life-Saving Station, which is kind of known as the Clipson Life-Saving Station, and the closest one, was also dispatched there. And so I'm just assuming that they both were. Regardless of who made it to the scene first, it was more than 4 hours after the vessel went aground that any rescuers arrived. They were unable to shoot a lifeline aboard, and since the surf boat was destroyed by the wind and waves, the stranded sailors were forced to jump for their lives into the surf. Charles Nelson of Nakata, he was 8 years old at the time, at least that was the report, remembered that many local citizens rode their trained horses into the surf, directed the survivors to grab hold of the harnesses or a horse's tail to be towed to safety. In a letter to the Seattle Times in 1981, Eleanor Burroughs Bauer wrote that her father, Will A. Barrows, was one of the rescuers on the beach. And here's a quote: Charles A. Payne, a 16-year-old cabin boy, was one of the survivors whom my father waded out and assisted to the shore. He often told how when he saw this huge horse swimming towards him, he wondered whether he would rather drown or be kicked to death by a horse. Those on the beach were yelling, "Hang on to his tail!" And that is what he did. Charles Payne later became editor of the Chinook Observer, as you heard. So 6 failed to make it to shore, 24 others reached land. One of those who reached shore, apprentice seaman Donald McDonald, later died of injuries, bringing the total number of fatalities to 7. Now, I always like it when I get a little something local where I get a slight connection to these wrecks. So I have a neighbor, and I live in Snohomish County. She wrote me about her family's connection with Oahu, and what she said was, "The only story I know is that my husband's great-grandfather, James Murray, was an officer on the Strathland, a ship out of Scotland that was headed to Portland from Hawaii and wrecked on the bar. My husband's grandfather was rescued by a seahorse, a horse trained in sea rescues. Survivors were put up in homes in Oahu, and he was housed with the Dalton family, whose teenage daughter Charlotte caught his eye and they married." So I thought that's a small world. Dalton was actually the first officer of the Strathland, and it was he who, the captain, as he left the ship, as James Murray left the ship, said, "Oh my God, I did the best I could. Tell people that, I didn't realize where we were, and I tried to navigate." And you can just imagine how, overwhelmed he was. He lost his ship, and he lost his life. And the Daltons, who the James Murray stayed with and married the daughter, Daltons, they were a very prominent Oahu family. C.C. Dalton was an attorney, I believe, and he was involved in a lot of the lawsuits that happened around the building of the Oahu Railway. Kind of some fascinating reading if you ever dig really deep into some of this stuff. So, and I only have one comment. Maybe you guys have more knowledge than I do. But these stories about these sea stallions, I find a little incredible. And only because my wife has been around horses a long time. And she rolled her eyes when I told her about these sea stallions and said, "I would never get behind a stallion and pull his tail. No way." So I said, "Yeah, well, the story keeps coming down." So personally, I think these horses got in the water with their riders on them, and I don't think they were particularly swimming. They might have been, but somebody on a horse, said, "Here, grab onto me, grab onto the saddle, grab onto the harness," and harness implies not a saddle, but the tack to hook up to a wagon. But there's all sorts of viewpoints on these incidents that happen, and everybody has different perspectives. So, maybe they were fully trained sea stallions, and maybe they practiced in having people pull their tails and pull them out of the surf. Truth is a lot of times stranger than fiction.
But you can, I've done that before. I've been in a lake with a horse swimming, grab it onto their tail and pull
Okay,
right out. So
there you go.
it is possible. Jump on bareback and jump off and grab the tail.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I read that story, well, I've done that.
I was just thinking if the horse is swimming and you're holding the tail.
Their legs are underneath them. It's not, you're behind them on their tail.
Yeah.
And their legs are well underneath them, so every chance we get, anyways, I never.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Jack Payne, Michael, Jack Payne said that he was held by that horse because he was going to swim out rather than get kicked.
Yeah.
And they called him back. And he told that for years.
Yeah.
Unless he wanted to pull everybody's leg.
As long as the horse did something.
Well, one observation I'd make is that they use horses initially in gill netting and along the shore, and they stopped doing that because the horses' hooves would rot because of the salt. But that suggested that there were horses who were trained at least to go in the surf, and might not be as fantastic as you think.
Okay, well, there you go. So, you know, like I said, it's very possible. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, it's a fun story. I love it. So that's that one, and then the last one is.
Excuse me a second, when we hear Ilwaco, are we thinking about Clipson or Ilwaco?
Well, the Clipson Life Saving Station was known as the Ilwaco Beach Life Saving Station until, as Sydney says, at least they changed they added a post office up there and started calling it Clipson.
So these stories about they were putting in houses, homes in Ilwaco, is that up here or down in Ilwaco? I wasn't sure which Ilwaco.
So if in this story, Ilwaco really refers to the Clipson area.
Oh, okay, well, that's quite a difference.
Yeah, and that's because it was called the Ilwaco Beach Life Saving Station. I don't know why.
I can't remember now, when, I don't think I wrote it down. I think it was, I don't know what year the post office went in. That's the year that they started calling it Clipson. And maybe 1990? Maybe that's too late. I don't remember.
Yeah, it's a good reference point though.
There's a great book called Postmarked Washington, and it lists all the post offices that there have ever been in Washington, whether the places still exist or not, and whether the post offices still exist or not. And the story of how each was created is in that book. And the Clipson Beach post office, it is in that, and that's where I got that information.
So back in 2006, all those 6 sailors that drowned were buried at the Ilwaco Cemetery, and they had white crosses, one for each one of them. And but there weren't any names on it because at the time they didn't know who they were. And then in 2006, they redid the crosses because they were all rotted away, and they put this marble stone there. And I'll pass this around. And they had a little ceremony. I went to it, and they put on it in loving memory of 6 unknown sailors from the ship Stropwing, drowned at Loomis, Washington, November 3rd, 1891. So it's called Loomis, Washington, because Loomis's mansion was there. Not really called that anymore. I'll pass this around, but what it kind of indicates is they didn't know the names. Well, if you look at that book, The Man in the Sea, the publisher, or the author O'Neill, he names the names of the 6 sailors that were lost. And so, and then there was a 7th who made it to the shore, and but he died later. So there are actually 7 fatalities off that wreck. But I just thought it was interesting. We now know the names of those sailors, and
Michael,
yes,
you say you know the names?
yeah.
Yeah, I do too. And I was going to put up a stone for them at the bottom of that memorial.
Oh.
And the keepers of North Head Lighthouse were going to pay for it until the ranger said that was not in the contract and we could not step out and do that.
Oh.
So I was unable to put that tombstone down there and let everybody know who it was.
Okay, well, that's too bad. The names, just for the record, the carpenter, Don Todd, the cook, Thomas Hunter, seaman Art Hughes and John Byers, and passenger H. Lewis, and an apprentice seaman that made it ashore but died later. His name was Donald McDonald. So they're not unknown, but and they're not forgotten, so that's kind of cool. Okay, I gotta move along here. The last one is the Shoalwater Bay Lighthouse. And as early as 1854, it was determined that a lighthouse was needed at Cape Shoalwater. That's one. The area, even at that time, had attained considerable importance as a port of call for traders. There were valuable oysters, lumber, and some agricultural resources available from the surrounding areas to be exploited. Moreover, it was the only port of refuge between the mouth of the Columbia and Cape Flattery. Authorized to be built at Shoalwater Bay in 1857 and completed in 1858. It served the area until 1940 when the ocean reclaimed the land. It's still
Michael,
on.
did you say Cape Shoalwater?
Yeah.
Where is that?
Well, the entrance there.
It's Tokeland?
Oakland, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there were a couple, 3 shipwrecks that are associated with it, and the stories aren't anywhere near as long as the other ones.
Excuse me.
I'll be done here in a minute.
Michael, just a second. Could we not have a crosstalk here in the back, because it's making it hard for the recording to pick up the speaker? Thank you.
So the nearby shipwrecks were, first of all, a very minor one. Empire was an American schooner. She missed stays and stranded on the Shoalwater Bar in 1854. Was outbound for San Francisco, and this is what I like, full of oysters. Crew made it to shore through the surf. The second one is kind of fun. It's shipwrecks are fun. Was the Lammerlaw. It was a British bark, 746 tons, 188 feet long. It was stranded October 31st, 1881 at Leadbetter Point when her master, Captain Pringle, mistook Shoalwater Bay for the Columbia Bar. I don't know how you do that, but I guess. Had a cargo of coal. The life-saving crew picked up the survivors while the beachcombers picked up the coal to heat their homes. Gibbs said the officers' mess table, that's the author of Pacific Graveyard, and the officers' mess table and some silver service are still in use at the home of Charles Nelson in the Cobb. Pringle was censured by a board of injury over the loss. And the interesting part of this story is the rescue. Captain A. Stream, lightkeeper of the Shoalwater Lighthouse, was first to notice the ship, and it is assumed that he went to South Bend, where he informed Captain John Brown aboard the steamer General Garfield, which responded by towing a surf boat with a volunteer crew out to the bark. On board the rescue boat was Tribal Chief Lighthouse Charlie, George Charlie, Bob Solici, along with Captain Brown, Sidney Smith, and a, quote, Happy Jack from South Bend. In 2 attempts, they rescued the entire crew of 15 and who were by this time clinging to the rigging in the top of the cabin. British government awarded each of the rescues a sterling silver medals in gratitude. It'd be really cool to see those medals.
Yeah.
You don't have any at the museum, do you?
Yes.
You do?
Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh.
A special act of Congress allowed the men to accept medals from a foreign government. And then the final wreck is the G. Broughton, is a British bark, 803 tons, stranded at Leadbetter Point just south of the entrance to Shoalwater Bay on November 1st, 1881. Inbound for Portland from Brisbane, Australia, it was in ballast, struck the beach at night in thick weather, and was a total loss. She grounded 1 day after the Lammerlaw went ashore in almost the exact same spot.
What was the name of that last ship?
It's the G. Broughton, Broughton. And the next day and in the same spot. What are the odds of that? So there's that, and thank you very much for your attention.
Did you say what happened to the lighthouse?
Yeah, I fell into the sea. Oh, I forgot that last part. It served the area until 1940 when the ocean reclaimed the land it stood on. And there's some really great pictures going on. There it is, sitting up there, and you can see the bluff is undermined and just before it fell. All of this stuff is, a lot of it is available online. I like the Gibbs book, but you know, he kind of came down here and did a bunch of quick research and wrote that book. But the O'Neill book has a lot of inside little stories in there, connections to people who live here, and I think it's the better book of the two, although it doesn't have as many wrecks in it.
And did you tell that my great-grandfather was the lightkeeper?
What?
R.H. Espy was lightkeeper
Yeah, he's on the list.
Yeah.
Well, our age, he was there, I don't know why.
We talked
He was the
about
lightkeeper for 2 years out there.
I know, it made money, right?
What, pardon?
He's out there making money.
No, he was out there because at least the family story is that he got sick, we don't know why, and he took off and he became the lightkeeper. I guess that was, maybe it was COVID.
Yeah.
It was sheltering at the lighthouse, I don't know.
I think we talked about this before, but it was funny for old people who know who Pat Paulson is, that his dad was a lightkeeper out there, and Pat Paulson lived in that lighthouse when he was a boy.
Okay. Yeah, there's a bunch of lightkeepers out there. I just like the crew that went out to rescue him. You know, they grabbed everybody they could, including the guy that was sitting at the bar frothing up to get down.
That's right.
Anyway, there you go.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so next we have Phil Allen, who's here at the end of this row. Phil grew up in California, but was a summer kid here on the peninsula. And after a career as an architect in California, he retired to Long Beach with his wife Nancy. And he's going to tell us about a shipwreck that's near and dear to his heart. So, Phil, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And Sydney, before I start that, the Alice was wrecked south of Ocean Park?
No, north.
North.
About a mile north, I think.
The graveyard of the Pacific map, we've all seen it, shows it south of Ocean Park.
Yeah, no, that's not right.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Because on my way as a kid to see the Glenmorangie, I know we passed a remainder of still showing of the Alice.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I mean, I'm assuming because Medora, when she talked about going to see the wreck, she talked about it being north
I just
of town.
caught that as I was looking at some of this stuff, and I thought, that isn't right, I passed it. My great-grandfather was 19 at the time, by the way. Sailors coming in at 19, a conversation of the morning. William Begg, he was full seaman on the ship. He wasn't a cabin boy, but he was on that side. The Glenmorangie came in, left Astoria in a fog, actually. They unloaded, took on ballast and left Astoria. But the wind died, went to nothing. And these ships, although the Glenmorangie was a complete sail ship, there was no engine or generator on board. When the wind went, it was at the mercy of the tides. And the current took it from the mouth of the river north in a dense, dense fog. And I don't know, I hope there's others that remember how dense that fog was. I can remember from the early 50s, you know, just a pea soup of it here. And as the place gets built, you know, the wetlands go away. And it isn't as foggy today as it was then. But 50 years earlier, 1896, when the Glenmorangie came ashore, they said they couldn't see anything. And the captain, old Archibald, Curry, he had them abandon ship. The current had taken them north about 4 miles, I think, north of Ocean Park, and the lookout yelled that he saw a breaker. So the captain tried to turn the ship around, to everything he could to get it headed out to sea, so to speak. But the fantail caught as got partway, the fantail caught on the sand, and the waves. It was a huge surf, and the waves pushed it around so it was facing south. And that's how these pictures, this is the Old Man and the Sea book, but you can see the Glenmorig here came completely dry on the sand. It was high tide when they came in, and it just, you can't call this a wreck. It was a ground shape. It was a beaching, very little damage. Although, because they came in what was kind of a stormy sea, the captain thought they were on the rocks. He didn't know where they were. So we had them abandon ship. And the guys that got off on the beach side floated right up onto the beach. The ones that got off in the lifeboat on the other side came around the stern, and as they did, a huge breaker brought that lifeboat up under the what do they call it?
The counter?
Counter, right. And there's a counter that projects, and it bashed the occupants of that boat against the top. 2 of them were killed in that, and my great-grandfather was injured. And then the story was, that was the luckiest day in his life, because he was taken down to what the San Francisco Examiner called Mrs. Taylor's, the old Taylor Hotel. And he was nursed back to health by one of her daughters, by Maud. And they married 3 years after that. And he didn't want to go back to Scotland. And he did find the climate here and the land very much like home, very much like Scotland, the Scotland that he left. And he stayed longer than 2 years. He was actually a Scotsman he was a Scotsman from the beginning. Once he got well enough to have his bearings about him, the insurance company hired him to be a guard on the ship, and he lived there on this ship above the sand for 2 full years until they fired him. A true Scotsman. He was charging an admittance fee to show people around his little side hustle. So he lost his job, and so after that, without a job, he married Maud, but he went to Alaska, not after the gold, but again, a true Scotsman. He got a job helping to build the railway from Skamakawa to Whitehorse, and to actually build that railway in there. And
I'm sorry, wait, from where is this Whitehorse?
Skagway.
Skag, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was greatly concerned that railway stretched a lot. Okay.
Thank you. Skagway. Thank you. So he came back, and then the next year he took his wife up there.
Yeah.
And their oldest daughter, my grandmother, was born in a tent cabin in Whitehorse in 1901. And I mean, talk about conditions for a birth. Her birth certificate was signed by a Mountie. So I don't know if either one of them became citizens, actually. I suppose that my grandmother, because Maud was a citizen, although an Indian citizen, You know, Mrs. Taylor was half Indian and half Quinault. And she had married, her mother had married Charles Stewart, who had a land grant across the bay in 1850. And he earned his money at the gold rush in California and got tired of the problems down there, so he came here, got a land grant, and after he got settled, he then married Mrs. Taylor's mother. And, so long family history. If you go to Astoria these days, as you come down off the hill at the end of the Dyke Road, the last slough across there is called Stewart Slough, and that is where his land grant began. From there on into the hills and the timber. So, anyway, this is a good short story. It is a fun book if anyone's interested in shipwrecks.
Oh, Phil, tell about when your great-grandfather took you out and said dig.
I will do that. I'm not finished yet.
Oh, I was afraid. You sat down and I worried.
Yeah, I did learn. I remember as a child being up here in the summers for sure. And he and my great-grandmother and events that we had at the old house they built. They built a house in 1905 on now Z Street, but it was called Brushlight Dairy Road.
What was it?
Now it's Z,
Yeah.
but it was Rushlight Dairy Road. And it went out, that's where everybody got their milk in those days.
Oh, yeah, right.
Down that road, there's no other construction, just their house on the right. It almost backs up to the cemetery. It's a little 5-acre piece, and it's still is. But, yeah, he took me out, and, well, he taught me to clam the way he did with an old shovel. But he took me out, we go driving north, and a little bit of the ship was still showing. You know, this ship was it was a riveted steel ship, so it didn't fall apart in 2 days. It lasted for, well, you know, 60 years above the sand, parts of it above the sand. And so he'd take me out there and we'd stop and he'd find that part that was out and he'd pace it off and he'd go, dig here. You know, I was young and energetic and I'd dig and we'd find the bow. And then he'd turn around and go the other way and he'd say, dig here, you know, and I'd get down about my height and it was the fantail, you know, the stern. And that was my introduction to the ship. And
Which
then
one was it?
What's that?
Which ship was it?
The Glenmorrig.
Oh, okay.
It was a British ship built in Scotland on the River Clyde. And we know a lot about that and the quality because the Clyde River Trust has found and refurbished their her sister ship built 2 years later, the Glen Lee, and they found it in a hull in Spain or something. Someone recognized it as being, you know, from the shipyard at Clyde, and they towed it in. It was basically a wreck, but it was steel hull and it was steel floating. So they redid it. It is now the main exhibit at the new Glasgow Transportation Museum. It's tied up to the dock right on the River Clyde. And so it's how we learned about some of the details that had the ship put together. One of them was the quality of the captain's house. This is teak, and the original plans had the captain's quarters and the wheelhouse made out and detailed in teak. And it was gorgeous. I'll leave these in the back for people to look at, but a picture of myself and the wheel right by the captain's captain's quarters. And then as my great-grandfather lived on the ship, he lived in the captain's quarters. And here's two photographs, one of the bed and the captain's desk, and one of the little kitchen that adjoined it. Now, there's also pictures that I have, and I'll put them on the table, of some of the crew bunkhouses and bunkhouse areas. But
No wonder he was charging money to see them.
well, it worked well. It was his Scottish heritage. And anyway, the couple of other things. Well, yeah. This family photo. What a crew! This is William Begg, the sailor. This is his mother-in-law, Mrs. Taylor. This is his wife, Maud, over here. No, that's my grandmother. Where's Maud? Maud's here someplace. And yeah, she's here. And a couple of quick stories. One is that he was musical. He was a very musical guy. He played the concertina. And Dobby Wagner, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Dobby reports being there at the house when my great-grandfather was playing an old Edison recording machine with cylinders of bagpipes in Scotland. And he would go sit there in the time that he had to do that. And then also that he sang with his concertina. Yeah. Now, Maud could not sing a lick. I mean, the woman, she was awful. But she knew every word to every song that they ever put together. And so she could always coach him when he was performing. And that was one. The other is that Tucker's not here. My wife reports, and I haven't seen it, but he has a bell from the Glenmorangie. One of the bells. I don't know which one. My cousin Paula, who has a house now on Z, she has a handbell from the Glenmorangie. And some of the old furniture was in the old house was, let's say, taken by some people who needed it. Saved by people who needed it worse than she did, obviously. So.
Well, now, what about the bowsprit? Was the bowsprit, is that what you call it? The bowsprit?
Oh, yeah. I do have a photograph of that somewhere, maybe.
What happened to that?
Oh, that's an interesting story.
Yeah.
Now, this lived the
figurehead.
Yeah, the figurehead.
Is that Billy Begg?
Yes, it is. Yeah. It lived in Moorhead Park. That's where this photograph was taken.
Oh.
She was kind of a monument in Moorhead Park, right, in Nakata there, for many, many years. But the park fell into kind of a disrepair or something happened, and so they reclaimed it. His daughter and he took it. His youngest daughter had a home on the Columbia River, an acreage. And they built a flagstone bow of a ship and mounted that on it, overlooking the river. And there were, I remember people, boats that would come by and they'd honk their horn to salute the figurehead. It was quite a moment. Someone, like some of the old furniture, someone was to repair and refurbish it, and they picked it up, and it was never returned.
Oh.
So we are without, but that's family for you. By the way, your photograph of the old Taylor Hotel has a picture of there is a 36-room annex behind where the Eagles are.
Right.
And where the Eagles, that whole corner was 2 stories, 36 rooms. Gas, glass and flame lit, no electric lights. And so it burned.
Hey, Phil?
Oh, yes.
I remember your grandparents, Phil and Adelaide, and that house on Z Street. And I remember being there in the early 60s with you. And there was honey coming down one of the whole walls of the house from the bees living behind the walls.
Yeah, we did have a hive there. Just us and Winnie the Pooh. Those walls were newspaper insulated, but inside and out both wood, both Douglas fir. And I actually helped the beekeeper pry off the wood on the inside of one little upstairs room. And we got to the honey and the queen. And we had old enameled like dish pans of honey that we put out and shared with our friends and relatives. Gary and I have been friends for
60 years. I'm
not that old. At least 60. Yeah. And he's a treasure in my life and my memory. So thank you all.
Could I ask one last question? Do you remember as much as possible, the exact cross street of the location of the wreck?
Cross street of the location. There were no, that was before there were any cross streets up there. That was between, that was about 4 miles north of, and it was south of the Oysterville Road. The only crossroad, there were no crossroads at that time.
So if you wanted to approach the wreck, would you walk south from the Oysterville approach?
Yes.
About how far do you think?
Well, if it's 5 miles to Ocean Park, then 1 mile.
Okay, because I remember seeing in that area these metal stanchions coming up out of the sand. And it was obviously a ship was there, but we never knew which one it was. But it was between the Ocean Park and Oysterville Approach because we were going up to walk up to see the Solano. And that's between those two, except we walked south from Oysterville, it was a lot closer.
Well, there never was, there wasn't a Surfside until 1960.
Yeah, oh, sure.
So there was nobody, there was no cross.
Okay, thank you.
That would be about 320th.
What's that?
That would be about 320th.
You think-
Oysterville Road is 340th.
Yeah, maybe about 320. You never know when the sand's gonna get moved around. Who knows?
Well, thank you, Phil, for all those memories that you shared and the photos and recollections from your youth and what your grandfather shared with you. Last, today we have Doug Knudsen, right here. And Doug is a well-known community member. He's the former owner of Box K Auto Repair and is currently a realtor on the peninsula. But more importantly for our purposes, Doug is president of the South Pacific County Technical Rescue Team. So we're going to hear about things from the rescue perspective. So Doug, take it away.
Thank you. So my history isn't quite as deep back as we've been talking earlier. I moved to the peninsula in 1978, and I was in the Coast Guard stationed at Cape Disappointment. So that's kind of when my local rescue started. And I actually did my first rescue on the peninsula in 1978. Spent a couple of years in the Coast Guard. Got out of the Coast Guard, tried to find a job. 1980 was not a good time to find a job. Everything was kind of going south, lumber, fishing, the whole works, so I started an auto repair shop. With the auto repair shop, I joined the Pacific County Fire District number 1, started doing fire department stuff, and that migrated into rope rescue on the cliffs at Fort Canby, and also surf rescue. And it's been kind of an interesting thing. I'm real interested in rescue and shipwrecks. Like I said, I don't have a lot of the history, but I've really studied the techniques that they were used, which we're still using today. And it's kind of interesting, just in my 46 years of doing this rescue, how rescue has really evolved. And that's, the people that were doing the rescue are pretty handy people, most of them. I mean, they have to be able to think on their feet and take an issue. I've got this 200-foot ship on the beach with people on it. How am I going to get those people off of that ship? Back then, most of the sailors were deathly afraid of the water. Very few of them ever swam. There was no life preservers, and they a lot of times would rather go up in the rigging and get away from the water as opposed to get in the water and be washed up on the beach. I've often marveled quite a bit that when these boats came in, ships came in, they had to be close enough to the beach where they're going to run aground. Now, our peninsula shelf is very, very flat, so it's shallow a long way out. But almost all of them are probably within a couple hundred yards at the max from being able to be on the beach. And a lot of them, if they would just have jumped in the water with a barrel or something and held their breath, they more than likely would have washed up on the beach unaided. But they got carried away or concerned about the water, and now the rescuers are trying to figure out how we're going to do this. And that's where the line throwing guns, the Lyle guns, things like that, the breeches buoys and things like that were brought into play. Kind of an interesting story. I think it's an interesting story. I am probably the last person to have actually rigged a breeches buoy to a shipwreck on the peninsula. And that was done in 2005 when the barge Millicoma came aground at North Head. The barge Millicoma was a 370-foot fuel barge towed by a Foss tug, went out to Columbia River empty, or coming into the Columbia River, they're going up to the yards. They are empty, storm comes up, barge breaks loose, pea soup fog, nobody can see anything, they lose the barge. Where'd the barge go?
300 feet?
378 feet, foot barge, 70 feet wide, flat bottom. So one of the Foss crew members knew Les Swenson, who was a local resident in Milwaukee, said, "Hey, I lost this barge." And Les is pretty nautical, a pretty handy guy too. He kind of figured out where the wind was, where they were, and he said, "Let's go up to North Head Lighthouse and see if we can see it." So he went out that next morning, loved North Head Lighthouse, and there it was, right on the rocks. Yep, there's the barge. They had to figure out how to get the barge back off. Our team was basically the only rope and surf rescue team in the area, so Foss Tug hired us to do the safety for the entire project. And it was a pretty interesting deal where the barge had, of the 15 compartments, 7 of them were ripped out of the bottom. and they were fuel barges, but they were empty, like I said. It had 5,000 gallons of fuel on it for the generators and things, but they had to run a crew 24 hours a day in order to try to get it up before it got beat apart on the beach from the rocks. So we had to figure out how to do egress for them. They were doing helicopter, getting the crew on during the daytime, but at nighttime, we had to sit there and we had to rig a line with a breeches buoy to the barge so we could get the people off the barge if something really, really went south on them. Another part that was kind of interesting in this whole deal was, how do you pull a steel barge off the rocks with 30% of the hull compromised in the bottom? I mean, how are you going to do that? And now you're going to tow it out. And this is actually one of the last salvage chief rescues, which the salvage chief, I don't know if everybody's familiar with that, was a landing craft from that story that has done a tremendous amount of rescues. They brought the salvage chief out. They're a mile off the beach. They take a helicopter. They run a line to the barge. They hook onto the barge, and they anchor, huge anchors out in front there. The whole ship is nothing but winches. So they're going to put pressure on this barge, and you can't just drag them off because it has to be able to float off on its own. They're not going to have enough pull in these winches to do this. So what they did was they had the crew go on, and they had these big, high-volume air blowers, and they sealed off all the vents in these fuel tanks, and they pumped air down into the barge. When they measured the air pressure in the barge, because the bottom's ripped out, they could tell how far below the water line that hole was and how much air they had to continuously blow into it. So now as they're trying to pull it out, the air is leaking out all the time. So they had these basically GM 671 blowers blowing air into these compartments. So they pumped air and pumped for days, and they find leaks, and they patch them and weld them and get them all ready to go. Then they waited for the high tide, and the salvage chief just put pressure on it. Just started pulling a little bit, and then all of a sudden you could see it start bouncing a little bit. And every time it bounced, it would come out a little bit farther, and a little bit farther, and a little bit farther. They didn't want to rip it off because it would have done more damage. So now they've got this barge, they floated away with air bubbling all the way around it. And they took it up to Astoria and they fixed it. And I don't know whatever happened to the barge, but there's a story of the last breeches buoy that was rigged on a ship.
How long did that take?
It was about a 5-day process. And
So what is a preacher buoy? Is it like a zip line?
That's exactly what it is. And what they used to do with the ships, they had a lyle gun, which is basically a cannon. And they had a small line hook to it. And they'd set this cannon up towards the ship, and their goal was to shoot this line into the rigging of the ship. They didn't want to hit the ship. They wanted to shoot past the ship and get out past. The line would land on the ship, and then the people on the ship would pull the small line to a bigger line, to a bigger line, to a bigger line, and they'd take it way up in the mast, and they'd tie it off to the rigging. And you remember, sailors were pretty handy back then. They knew their ropes, their knots, their pulleys, their things. And then they would literally put people in a seat, so to speak, like a life ring with 2 legs that went down into it. And then they would have a line tied to it, and the crew would pull them to the beach, then they'd pull it back. They wanted to get up high as they could, because if they couldn't get high in the rigging, well, then they dragged the survivors to the surf. And the survivors weren't real thrilled with that happening, because, you know, our water's cold. A lot of these storms, or the shipwrecks, ended up in the wintertime. Water temperature is high 40s, low 50s, pretty miserable stuff. So they would literally shoot these cannons. When I was actually in the Coast Guard, we had a Lyle gun, which was a rifle, 30-06, and you would put the steel tube down the end of it with a big float on the end, and we would take that, and it would hook to a string, and we would shoot that over the top of ships. If you're out in the ocean or something like that, and you can't get real close to a ship to try to get a tow line on, you would shoot this Lyle gun. And it was always kind of a prank for the new guys. They'd get to fire this gun off, you tell them to put it up on their shoulder. And of course, it dislocated about a shoulder. Tremendous amount of kick, and you'd end up putting it down on the deck is what you'd like to do on a life jacket. and then you'd shoot this line and then we'd go through the same process. So here they went from cannons now to rifles, basically, and or heaving lines if you're that close. So it's a pretty interesting way of doing it. And as it's evolving, we're still using a lot of the same techniques that they were using, 200 years ago.
I used to volunteer at the North Head Lighthouse, and there was a picture, I don't know if it's still there, they had a picture of that barge.
Yeah,
Because when you're walking down the sidewalk to get to the lighthouse, that over to the right down there is where that barge was.
yeah, it was.
And it's really dangerous down there. You can see those waves, they're horrible.
We sat on a rock down there for 5 days.
Did you get any pictures of the shooting the gun and getting
We
the
didn't
line?
use the gun. They ran the line. We were within 100 feet of the barge. So I don't remember if we had a helicopter take it over, if we just threw a heaving line, or exactly how that whole thing came across, but we tensioned it and everybody had harnesses. We didn't really have the breaches, but we had climbing harnesses, and they hooked into a pulley, and we could pull it.
Did you have any pictures of it set up and actually using
Well,
it?
I probably got some somewhere. That was before cell phones, though, or
Yeah.
anyway.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And as far as lighthouses, when the lighthouses in the late 70s were controlled by the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard was in charge of all maintenance, and all the Fresnel lenses were really mechanical. And since that time, they pretty much turned the Fresnel lenses off, and they've mounted buoy lights on the outside. So they're the same lights you're seeing on a buoy floating out in the river is what they're using on the lighthouses now. But we had to, part of our deal was anytime there was a power outage, back up. Every lighthouse has got a signal, a light signal. And that light signal has to be consistent every single time, because you want to be able to know by that signal which lighthouse you're looking at, especially when you have 2 of them, or when you're coming up from California, you look for a specific signal, just like the lighthouses have a specific paint scheme. So there's no 2 lighthouses painted the same. You want to be able to visually look at it and see what it is, coupled with the fact in the 70s they also broadcasted a radio signal, which is a Morse code radio signal. So if you were trying to navigate, even in the 70s, I worked on a buoy tender in the 70s up in Alaska, and we were setting buoys with sextants and stars and landmarks. We weren't using electronics. So couple that back 100 years before that, they're really relying on these different things to know where they are. Adding a radio beacon was huge because they had radio direction finders. And you could pick up a frequency from one lighthouse to the next lighthouse, and you could kind of triangulate where you actually are on the coast, so you kind of know where you're going. So getting back to power outages in Oahu, which happened all the time. Every time the electricity blipped, we'd have to drop everything we're doing, have to go to the lighthouse, go all up the stairs, and we had to reset the lenses so the flash pattern was correct again. Because when you lost power, it wigged them all out. Sometimes we'd lose power 6 or 7 times a night.
Oh my God.
Lots of up and down. And this was in the 70s. Now the Coast Guard doesn't own the lighthouses anymore. State parks took them over, which everybody's pretty aware of how that's going. But that's just another lighthouse tidbit.
How is that going?
The lighthouse?
The state parks taking the lighthouses. You said everybody knows
They
how
have
it's
enough
going.
money, finally got enough money to repair it.
Well, yeah, that's why, I don't know how that's going.
North Head looks great.
Yeah.
North Head has looked that good since I've been around North Head. They've done an absolute phenomenal job on that, and the new fencing around it. I mean, it really set it back to its original state.
Cape Disappointment was pretty sad.
KD is pretty tough.
Pretty sad.
Pretty tough.
But somebody can do that. It's too hard to get up there.
Yeah, and those lighthouses, we used to tow mainly fishing boats, 70, 80, 100 feet, and those lighthouses were always really, really comforting. You kind of knew where you were, and you'd be out 35 miles coming in, and then you start seeing that light flash, and you go, oh, okay, now I'm kind of almost home. So anyway, those are a couple of the things that relate to the history. Anybody have any questions about any of that?
I just want to make a statement. I work in the same office with Doug, and he'll come in some mornings and he'll say he watched the sunrise 100 yards off the beach swimming. And out in that water, I know he has much to do, but still, whether the two or three of you that go out there and watch the sunrise. But that's pretty good training all the time.
Well, and our team requires physical ability and swimming ability, and we have to prove our competencies every single year to everybody. And that involves swim tests, physical conditioning tests, and operational tests for the equipment we're using. So that kind of requires it. We've been doing surf rescue since about 1985, and we've been doing cliff rescue since 1978 was when the team was formed. Now the Coast Guard's pretty much taken over most of the rope rescue stuff because, frankly, it's a lot easier with a helicopter. And we can't afford helicopters. But the Coast Guard actually hired our team when they started the cliff walker program. They had an issue down the Oregon coast where they were doing a rescue, helicopter got too close to the rock, knocked the helicopter out of the sky, helicopter falls, a bunch of Coast Guardsmen died. So they thought, who is going to rescue the Coast Guard? So they started a cliff walker program where they're going to start suspending rescue swimmers from the helicopters and start working the cliffs and trying to figure that whole thing out. They had the motor lifeboat school here, the heavy weather school for the Coast Guardsmen for running the small boats, and they also started running the heavy weather helicopter, a rescue swimmer class up here. And they hired our team to provide safety for them while they were learning how to do this. So we were literally hanging off the rocks with helicopters coming over the top, working with the new rescue swimmers to try to figure out what kind of gear they need, how the policies and procedures are going to work, what's it like working underneath a helicopter, which is, it's no fun. It's not. It's pretty horrendous. So the team has got a lot of good history to it, and a lot of people that have been a part of it and coming and going. And right now we're planning on our 32nd or 33rd annual surf rescue drill. We do this with the Coast Guard every year, where we do a scenario where there's a boat capsize, boat fire, something. We're going to be doing off the Bolstead approach. It'll be the second Monday in May at 6 o'clock, where they'll Coast Guard dump 6 victims in the water, and then we will respond, pull them out of the water. They'll bring a helicopter, probably do a hoist. We'll bring them back to the beach. We'll do a triage and transport all the way to the hospital. And it's a multi-agency drill where all the emergency responders come together and work together and figure out how the whole process goes. We do that at the beginning of the season because it's something we need to practice every year.
What day is that?
That's the second Monday in May. I don't remember exactly. The 13th. It'll be at 6 o'clock at
Morning?
p.m.
Oh, PM.
On the Bolstead Beach approach.
The caves that keep its appointment there, and so I was down there one time with a guy who just worked for Coast Guard, and how many people they had to rescue out there, go into the caves and high tide comes up and you're stranded back in there. And how often did that happen?
So, has everybody seen the movie The Guardian? So The Guardian is a Kevin Costner film. It's about a Coast Guard rescue swimmer. It was actually filmed in Waikiki, and they used the exact cave he's talking about to rescue our Waikiki.
I had to practice that last year. The Canadian Coast Guard was there practicing, pulling somebody out of the cave.
Well, and they're doing some pretty crazy stuff where they're putting rescue swimmers in on ropes into the cave and then dragging them back out.
Yeah, watch them do that. It was incredible. They would get a movie of them doing that. It's really neat.
I have never done a rescue in that cave. We've never had a call in the cave.
Pretty scary, and I can imagine.
We did go in the cave when we were training to work the Guardian, because we knew they would be using the cave. And you know, it's one thing doing a rescue. That person's in trouble. I can see it. I know what's going on. I go deal with it. I bring it back to the beach. In the movie world, sometimes I don't think they put a big value on people's lives. But we were literally putting people in really, really crazy situations and watching it deteriorate. and waiting for them to say, okay, you better go get them out. So in order to do that, we trained in the area, and we went in that cave, and we played around in the cave. And it's kind of interesting when you're doing cave rescue, this is kind of a little off subject, but you know how like there's a seventh wave is always the biggest wave? You go in these caves and the water's coming and coming and getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and you think, is this a really good choice? But then the water gets to a certain point where it builds up, and it just flushes you out like big toilets. So you just wait for the waves to build up, and it'll drag you right back out in that cave. I mean, I've done a lot of caves, but it's kind of an interesting deal. You just have to keep your knees up to the rocks down there, and when you come out pretty quick. But we had to figure out what we'd have to do if we had to pull people out of the cave, and we never did. But the Coast Guard does train there every year.
Oh, so fast, isn't there a bench way back in there that people can be up high enough? And the guy said people in a high tide actually got somebody out of there, was stuck way back up in that bench, able to drag them out.
Yeah, that was a scenario in the Guardian, the movie. There is a bench up in there where you can get up. And we were in there in pretty high tide, and I think it probably is dry most of the time. I mean, it's wet because water splashing.
They'd be scared as all hell.
What's that?
It's never underwater.
Well, I wouldn't say never, but sometimes you'd kind of choose how we're going to get involved with that, and you know.
I'm interested in what you were describing is underneath the water, close to the peninsula, but at the north end, where that town is just being eaten away.
Washaway Beach.
Washaway Beach. Are there shoals anywhere along the boundary, I mean, the waters of the peninsula?
You know, there are a tremendous amount of them. I don't spend a lot of time at the mouth of Willapa Bay. I have been up there before, but I've got my own theory on Washaway Beach and all that stuff, because Washaway Beach has got rivers kind of running through both sides of it. And we all know that when the jetties were formed, the beach started accreting, going out. The other thing that's happened is not only are they accreting out, but they're also, the peninsula's getting longer. It used to be you couldn't get to Grassy Island other than really, really low tide. Now there's a land bridge that goes across it, and very seldom can you ever not get through there. And I think what's happening is, I think the peninsula's growing in length, which is moving the entrance to Willapa Bay north, and you've got the rivers that are coming out, and you know Willapa Bay's got some pretty tremendous currents. I've been at the entrance to Willapa Bay, where you're looking at it's a stream and ebb, and it looks like the water just dropped 6 feet. I mean, the water is just coming out at torrents out there. Willapa Bay is supposed to be the cleanest estuary in the United States and does a complete water change twice a day. That's what they say. I've never researched, but I've heard that from multiple sources. So we're talking about a tremendous amount of water coming out the entrance to Willapa Bay. Now we couple that with the peninsula getting wider and longer and shifting the mouth of Willapa Bay farther north. I think that's what's causing Washaway Beach problems. And it would have started about the time the lighthouse was there, because the jetties were put in the early 1900s, and the sand that's coming down the Columbia River, it's natural back eddy on the backside of those jetties, starts bringing the sand north. And that's about when they started losing lighthouses. There used to be a Coast Guard station up there. They lost a Coast Guard station too. It was an active Coast Guard station in the 60s, I think. 60s or something. It was the Shoalwater Bay Coast Guard station. And then they ended up moving it up to Grays Harbor. So there was an active Coast Guard station there.
It's like a fire hose or accelerates. Accelerates the water, get narrow, and it goes out there faster.
Well, that's the idea of both the jetties. What they're trying to do is they're trying to direct, the Columbia River water, they're trying to direct it and channel it into a narrower opening with the hopes that it's going to scour out.
Pull the sand out, pull the sand further out. Yeah.
That's why the North Jetty and the South Jetty were built, and Gate Jetty. And I feel that's got a lot to do with Washaway Beach and Lighthouse.
Last year, the Observer had an article about, years ago, instead of putting the mouth of the river as a navigable channel, they were going to go through Willapa, the mouth of the Willapa, because it was already there. I mean, it was great for ships, but I don't think the article ever said who bought it, but it never went anywhere. And they said it would have been a lot safer if they would have done it, because where the mouth is now, it's so dangerous to show.
Doug, that like the Coast Guard station up there they left the old boathouse that's set out there in Tokeland, and Wally Mann, the artist up there, painted a lot of pictures of it people have done over the years, and he was telling us that when that went down, finally in a storm, it had fallen into the mouth of the bay, and he said that whole thing, that huge building, the coursways were still on the front, put the boats down, big giant thing, way bigger than this place. It was all gone, 2 tides.
Yeah.
He said 2 tides, there wasn't a stick of wood left, there was nothing left there, just a few posts in the water. That's it, all gone, all gone. So, it's powerful out there, it is powerful.
Well, the other side of that too is, getting back to some ships break up and some ships don't. The ship is designed to be supported, the whole hull is designed to be supported, either on the keel and propped up, or in the water. And the water is providing support for that hull to hold it in place. If it comes in and it lands on anything other than that keel or bangs down on the side, it would crack like an eggshell will, because its strength isn't designed to do that. So the fact that some of these ships just flat broke apart, like you're talking about the steel hull sitting there for 60 years. It parked on the beach pretty much like you were saying, and it was right on the keel. And it being a steel ship, it didn't have much support, but wooden ships didn't have that benefit. So they're very, very fragile and they're out of their element. And they're designed to be in the water.
I have a question about entering the mouth of the Columbia. When is the safest tide? Is it, like the middle of the flood or just after the slack? And then how do you calculate based on what the river flow is at that moment?
With the great navigational buoys we have out there in NOAA, you can cross a lot of the time. But what you're looking for is a high water slack or a low water slack if you think you're having problems. And there might be problems. But the other thing that comes up is a lot of times when the high tide or a low tide have changed the tide, the wind shifts. So if you're in a sailboat, you really kind of need to take that into fact too. So, our swells are what they call first generation swells. And a swell is caused by currents, but the majority of what our swells are caused by are wind. So the wind blowing across the surface of the water, and the Coast Guard manual, the boot camp would tell you by how many whitecaps you're seeing out there, you should be able to accurately tell how fast the wind is blowing, or how hard the wind is blowing. I can't do that now, but using that for an example, these first generation swells start in Japan. So we've got 3,000 miles of swell to build, unencumbered by anything until it gets to us. So a lot of times there's a lot of power behind all of that. And that is one thing that makes our bar a little impassable sometimes. So we may have a benign tide, but if we have a large event out in the ocean that's causing a large swell, it's going to affect it. So it may say, well, I'm going to go through a high water slack. But if there's a huge swell, you're going to have more problems. The other thing is the duration of the swell. The harder the wind blows, the closer the waves you get together. If you have an 8-foot swell on a 20-foot second, 20-second interval, a lot of times that's not that big of a deal. If you've got an 8-foot swell on an 8-foot second, 8-second interval, now you've got a real problem. So it's more than tide, it's wind conditions, swell, weather conditions, and I'm not a full-time mariner. So what I'm relying on is what I've read and what I've seen and what I've done. We've spent a lot of time out there. We try not to go out of max F. sometimes that current's going 6 and 7 miles an hour, and it's hitting the ocean water at the same time. And if you got this first generation swell on a close interval coming, hitting a 6 knot current coming out, it's kind of a recipe for disaster.
Did that earthquake in Taiwan have any effect here at all?
I have not heard anything, not a thing.
I have this app on my phone, I don't know where it came from, but I'm always alerted when there's tsunamis. And the last alert I got said that it's not gonna affect us.
But it would hit here, I mean, depending on how high it would be, the wave would still make it over here, right?
Potentially, yeah.
Right, but we just, if we knew by when it started, we could possibly see it come ashore, if it was small, it would still land ashore.
So, tsunamis aren't big mountains of water that come across the ocean. They're maybe a raise in elevation. So, and now we're getting a little bit of Doug's opinion, so I got plenty of those too. But Hawaii has some tremendous breaking waves for surfing. Hawaii is a volcano. It's got a real steep bank to it, okay? Those waves, first generation waves coming from Japan, hit that rock shelf, and they got a lot of power behind them. They build up and they crash. They build up and they crash. They used to say that the depth of the water dictates how high the breaker is going to be. We've got a flat shelf. It goes out for a mile. It may only be 30 feet deep, 40 feet deep, a mile out. We've got a sandy bottom. That water comes in and starts hitting the sandy beach, and there's turbulence with that. As it's going through the turbulence, it's picking all the sand up, making the water heavier and heavier and heavier, and it can't really build because all of a sudden the weight's getting doubled and tripled, so we end up with a surge. We don't end up with this big mountain high wall of water that comes down on top. Doug's opinion, but I've done 3 evacuations on the peninsula for tsunamis in the last 46 years, and been bit by a lot of dogs doing it. But every time there's been an issue, we haven't even hardly seen anything that's hit the peninsula. Now, there was a 64 earthquake up in Kodiak, and I was up in Kodiak not during that time, but I talked to people that were actually there when that earthquake happened, and Old Woman's Bay is about 70 feet deep. It's a huge bay up there. He said all the water went away. And they said they knew at that point things were going south really, really quick. So they headed up on Old Woman. But that earthquake really, really did problems down in Seaside. Cannon Beach. But if you look at the Noquayacum River, it points towards the northwest. So those swells of the tsunami or the wave surge that was set up by there went right straight up the river. That's why there's so much devastation in Seaside, but there wasn't that much in Long Beach. I wasn't here for
By
Long
the
Beach.
angle of
The angle of the wave's going to hit the wave.
Yeah.
And Crescent City is cursed. They get everything. I mean, they get it all. They stick out. It sticks out. They catch it every wave. It's bad.
So I don't feel I'm too concerned about a tsunami from Japan. I'm not saying a person shouldn't be, prepared and monitor and keep an eye on things. But
does the energy then get dissipated as it hits the shallow, it's eating itself up?
absolutely it does. It does, and what's going to happen is if it even does breach the primary dune, the dunes are going to absorb so much of the water. Now, Volstead Beach approach, Ocean Park Beach approach, Clipson Beach approach, Seavey Beach approach, I probably wouldn't want to be standing in the middle of the road there if something was really going to happen. Anyway.
Do you ever consider using some sea stallions in your work?
Yeah, we do. We got 4 of them. They've got 110 horses each. Yeah, we use a lot of personal watercraft. Yeah. And a lot of swimming. The majority of our rescues are swimming rescues. Most of the times you're going to get somebody, you got to be right on top of it. And, a 4-hour response time doesn't cut it. So, yeah, Our initial response for anybody in the water is we try to send rescue swimmers immediately to leave the scene, put them in the water, get the person floating, and then we'll figure out what we're gonna do with them from there.
Using jet skis to get them out there?
We, no, they swim,
They
most of them swim. And that gets back to our swimming ability. So the majority, probably 80% of our rescues have been swimming, and then we'll bring them back to the beach with the jet ski. My opinion, as soon as you get that person stabilized, that's the rescue. Transporting them back to the beach is a different side of it. And at that point, it's either going to be a Coast Guard helicopter, Coast Guard boat, or person watercraft, or they'll swim them back to the beach. And all that.
Thank goodness you guys are out there, you know that? It really is something.
Our team is 100% volunteer. We're a nonprofit, and we've been 100% volunteer since 1978.
Wow.
And we're not we don't belong to the sheriff's department, we don't belong to the fire department. We're our own company. Plus we provide all the beach safety education, all the signs on the approaches, all the brochures, coloring books in the restaurants. We have found, when we started doing beach patrol, we do a beach patrol every year. The city of Long Beach hired us to do this. They've always been very, very proactive. We started tracking, what are the questions? What are the problems? What's happening down here? What are we having to deal with consistently? And at that point, we came up with a list of all the things that we did. And after we took that list of things, whether it's swimming in the ocean, campfires, digging holes in the dunes, whatever, climbing on the rocks and jetties, messing with wildlife, we turned that into a beach safety education program. And we started taking it into all the schools and tried to educate people with the hazards that we have in our area, because it's never a good ending to a vacation when you don't take one of your loved ones home. So we have found it's a lot more enjoyable to do the education than it is the rescue. Right. And if you don't have a rescue...
Avoid the rescue, hopefully, right.
How are you connected to PATCOM, or did you get the 911?
We are dispatched through 911, that's correct. Yep. Anyway.
Okay, folks, I just want to thank everybody, thank you that participated and came and spoke very much. Thank the rest of you a lot. And tell you, I did say in my little note that we have 2 feathers in our caps. You have a cap. You have 2 feathers, I see it. Mostly, I think in Steve's cap. In February, we had our loggers program, and you remember Roy Knott, who was from Weyerhaeuser, that Gene Nitzel was going to duke it out with, I think. And that was great. And he had prepared something for his kids, which he brought and distributed a few copies of, about the history of logging in Pacific County. Steve Rogers, president of Pacific County Historical Society and editor-in-chief of the Southwestern magazine, their quarterly, half-yearly, yearly,
Everyone's
biannual magazine, has taken that material, and the Southwester will come out in the next week or so. Is that right?
It'll be a while still, but I'm wrapping it up.
Are you going to have it in time for the annual meeting?
No, but I'll have a copy for people to...
Anyway, that is great to come out of this history forum, to have a Southwester for posterity. And the second thing is that Roy Knott himself will be the speaker at the Pacific County Historical Society's annual membership meeting on the 14th of April. And so it's really great because, you know, our purpose is just to promote our interest in knowledge about history, And if we can get it written down, that's even more better. More better.
Our annual meeting is on April 14th
April 14th.
at the historic, what used to be the Little Harbor Golf Course, which is now Riverside Golf Course. And they've rebuilt the original structure, and just did a good job of it. A lot of rich history.
Are you full up already? Are you full?
No.
You're not?
No.
Ah, well, some of it, is it
Half full.
members only?
Well, jury's still out on that one, but we're not checking for cards.
What time is that? What time?
What time is it, Steve? For the biggest.
1 o'clock.
One o'clock? 1 o'clock.
And there'll be, the Hilton Hotel is not catering this year.
And it's not, okay, next time it's going to be, transportation. And, Steve is on about the big canal plan from here to there, from Seattle down to the Columbia, I guess. And you're going to talk about that, right?
Yeah.
I remember the offer. And also, it looks like Jim States may come and talk about ferries and the potential bike and pedestrian ferry that was, has been approved apparently.
Sydney, I want to talk before 6.
And you're wise. We'll see to it. No, because I think a lot of what Jim is going to be talking about is history of the future, we'll call it. But I know a lot of people are interested in the idea of a ferry on the bay again. And this is the cutting edge. And I think it'll be really fun to hear. And that'll be our last gathering for the year. So spread the word.